hi there, I have a cutting board here, so I thought, why don't we craft a diorama? For this diorama, I chose to go with this section of the Hufflepuff Common Room. It's not particularly easy, it's rather curved and got lots of weird structure around it, but hey, how hard can it be? To start things off, I have this thicker foam board. It's more of a foam core board, and I'm just gonna draw some outline of the structure here. Now remember, it's got quite a lot of curves here, so I got to get measurements somewhat accurate. Once that's done, I'm gonna start working on this curved wall. For that, I'm going to be using a thinner foam core board. This is because it's going to be flexible and it will allow me to bend and shape it into the curve I want. Once I've done some approximate measurements here, I'll be cutting out the window frames. Now that that's done, I will be cutting some cut sections into the wall. This is to simulate the exposed brick texture on this curved wall. In this case, I'm using a sculpting tool to lightly press it into the foam board. In this way, I can create a rather convincing brick texture. I'll repeat the same process for several sections on the wall and give it a nice coat of color. This dark color will serve as the outline of the bricks because I can wipe it away later on because the surface of the foam board is non-absorbent. In this case, I use a tissue paper to wipe it off before the paint dries too quickly. Now the reason I'm doing this instead of washing it after painting is because I want the darker lines to be a bit more muted rather than too dark. For the wall itself, the idea is quite similar here, but instead of wiping the whole color away, I will gently dab it with a tissue paper and this will create a slightly random texture on the wall. To get the bricks done here, there is no easy method, so I'll just have to brute force it and paint every single brick one at a time. It's a rather painful process and I'll have to vary the colors here and not just use one single color. Now the whole design for the Hufflepuff room is gonna be based on this Hogwarts Legacy game. The reason is mainly because I can get into all the details. And why did I choose Hufflepuff instead of like houses like Gryffindor or Slytherin is mainly because I really like the aesthetics of it, the woody furniture, and the grassy texture of it. And in a way, I feel like Hufflepuff never really got much attention in the Harry Potter series, so time to do some justice there. I suppose the same could be said for the Ravenclaw house as well. They didn't really get much of an attention and this might be a hot take, but personally I feel like the world of Harry Potter would have been much better if it was central to the Ravenclaw or the Hufflepuffs. They just seem like it's more magical in my opinion. But well, sadly I'm not a writer, so... Anyway, now that the walls and floors have been done, I've cut them out into shape and also this stencil. This stencil will sort of serve as the structural support for the walls to maintain the curve and also to make sure that the two walls join together without leaving much of a seam. After that, I'll add a few supports on the structure. This is purely temporary and its function is mostly to keep the whole structure in the correct dimension and also to have something to hold on to. And now I can start working on the window frames. For this I just use a few strips of balsa wood, paint it to some appropriate color, and I will stick them one at a time. Now I can't prefabricate these because the wall is curved and I don't really know how to get the exact curve, so it's gonna be a rather finicky process. But well, I gotta get with it anyway. Next up, I need to work on this door at the bottom. In Hogwarts Legacy game, it looks like it has another room adjoining it, but since I'm not gonna be doing that, I think I'll cover it up with some sort of door. For this, I'll just use another piece of balsa wood and take some creative liberty with it to make it look like a door. I have no idea what it looks like, but I assume it's gonna look something like this. After a sloppy paint job, I will just slide it onto the bottom. This is some baked flexible polymer. I will be using this to make the window sills, and if you're asking me why I chose this, well, really there's no reason. I just thought of experimenting with it, and that's because, believe it or not, this is my very first diorama and technically my very first crafting project ever. So if you see any mistakes that I'm making or techniques that I could improve on, please let me know down in the comments below. However, what I'm not new to is engineering, and with a bit of mathematics we get the correct measurements on the angle and the number of stairs. For this I'll start off with some very thin and flexible strips of wood, and this is important because this allows me to curve the wood strip easily without having to worry about the diameter of the curve, and it's as simple as getting the length correct. For the stairs, I've cut out some of these wooden strips, and the size isn't just random. The thickness and width is rather important so that I can get the actual curve properly. Now, if I were to get the height or width wrong, then the curved stair wouldn't align with the wall. That's just how stairs work. But if I get everything correct, then the curve would be as I needed it to be, and it should align properly at the end. And this is why we all need to learn some mathematics. After that, I need to work on this lamp at the back. For that, I decided to use this LED. It's called a fairy light, and there's 3 reasons why I chose this. The first reason is that, well, I don't really have any other lights. The second is that it conveniently happened to have the same yellow glow as we see in the Hogwarts Legacy game. And thirdly, the wires on this LED is stiff, and I can use it to my advantage to make it the support of the lamp. In this case, I'll twist the cable a bit loosely, and this makes it look somewhat like a chain dangling from the roof. To make the lamp itself, I will use this plumber's tape. It's easy to wrap around, and I can also squeeze it to form the bulk of the lamp. Not only that, it also serves another purpose. The lights from this LED is simply too bright, and this plumber's tape helps reduce the intensity a bit, making it more of a glow rather than a harsh light. Once that's done, it's a matter of drilling a hole and sliding it through the back. Now that most of the back has been completed, I can start working on this upper deck. I had done some measurements before and cut out this baseboard. This stencil or baseboard will serve as the backbone of my upper deck. I'm not necessarily concerned about the color here because it will be completely covered with wood at the end of this build. Now at this point you might be wondering why I'm using strips instead of one single wood. Well, that's because even though this will take me a longer time, I wanted the texture to be better. So if you look closely, I'm trying to leave minute little gaps between the planks in hopes of simulating a real deck. And frankly, the geometry is very simple and it's very straightforward, so it's not necessarily a very complicated task. Now, while I fast forward and time lapse the rest of the deck, I want to tell you a secret about the Harry Potter series. Now, it's not a well-known secret. It's not like it's being closely guarded or something like that, but it's rather dramatic, so hear me out. Now the secret is about Gryffindor and Hufflepuff houses. And the thing is that the Gryffindor house and the Hufflepuff house are, time's up, so whatever. Okay, so now that my deck is partially completed, I'm trying to do a test fit to make sure it works. And since it seems to fit on perfectly well, I will glue in these bottom sections of the stair. Now I don't want to stick the whole thing to the back structure just yet because I want to work on the railings first. Now this is another brain-numbing process here, but thankfully you won't get to see the pain. One thing I do want to show you is this one. And this is the handrail for the railing, and instead of it being just one chunk, I've added a wider strip outside. By doing so, the wider strip can stay outside of the railings and it will hide some of the uneven joints and also make the whole structure a bit more realistic. With that done, it's just a matter of cutting it to the desired shapes or lengths in this case, and I will stick it to the base just like everything else. Now, since this is going to be just the same, I will have some time, so let me continue with the secrets of the Harry Potter series that I was, going to talk to you earlier. So, the Gryffindor and the Hufflepuff, okay, never mind, it's completed again. Alright, anyway, my upper deck railing and stairs have been completed, so I'll give it a paint job and start working on this newel post. Now these newel posts are rather easy. I'll just use a nail filer here and gently brush off some of the edges here and there, and I'll just take my time with it and turn it into this blob. I'll continue to make 4 of these, 2 for the upper deck and 2 for the bottom sections. Once I'm done with a paint job on all these, I'll give a slight weathering effect using the same nail filer. I'll focus a lot of my attention on the stairs section here because this is where, realistically, much of the wear will happen. And finally, I'll top it off with the newel posts that we made just earlier. And with that, the deck is now completed, but I want to add the supporting arch here before I can put the whole thing in. It just makes the whole assembly a lot more simpler. I've made a rough sketch of the whole design and I'll carve the whole thing out of wood. And yes, it does sound a bit silly, but the reason I'm using wood here is because I've actually tried to make it using polymer clay. And although it's a much easier process, I didn't really like how it turned out at the end. I just preferred the texture of wood rather than the soft finish of the polymer clay. That's something I'm really looking forward to in this whole diorama. So even though it might take me a longer process, I decided to stick with balsa wood, and honestly I think the extra effort was worth it. With that, I will be painting it and then stick it to the bottom part of the upper deck. This way I can glue the whole structure as a whole onto the back wall. Once the whole thing is in place, I will add in this back wall, which is also curved, and I hate to admit it, but it took me quite a while to figure that curve out. With most of the things on the background completed, I need to focus on this weird curved structure, because every other measurements come from this point. To make this weird curved wall, I'll be using thin strips of wood here, and I've seen some YouTubers do these kind of tricks where they use some water which rehydrates the wood, and it allows us to bend the wood in a certain way, so that's what I'm trying to achieve here. But the thing is, eventually I realized that because I'm using PVA glue, which is essentially a water-based glue, it made it much longer for the glue to dry. On top of that, it also made the wood warp in a weird way, and you can see that from this final result. It's not evenly curved, and I had to fix it later on. Now this is just the wall itself, and I need to add a few extra layers to make the shape of the column. And the wall itself is also full of exposed brickwork, so once again I had to spend an awful lot of time drawing in the individual little bricks and painting it with appropriate colors. However, once that's done, I can glue these 2 pieces into their position, and from here on out I can start to work on the main arches. Now this main arch is a rather chunky piece, and I'll use the same method as I did before with the supporting arch and the upper deck here. I'll draw an outline, I'll cut these structures out like I did before, and for the designs I really wanted to carve it out here, but I have very little experience with wood carving, so I was a bit skeptical of it, and I ended up not doing it, which in retrospect I wish I had carved it out. But that's fine, because that is how we learn things, by actually doing them. Once the arch is in place, I will add a few horizontal beams to support the arch, and this is also one way of making sure that the curves don't bend. Now to get a sense of the whole exterior, I decided to use this air drying clay. Initially, I thought this would be the soil layer that would come on top of the structure here, which unfortunately I ended up replacing altogether. After that, I went to the hobby store and bought these cute little things. I'm just kidding, I bought these. This is acrylic fabric, and this is the kind of stuff that you make a painting canvas out of. But in my case, I will use this to form carpets for my diorama. The idea here is to get the color palette correct, and I'm not too worried about the pattern being exactly the same, although I'm trying to maintain as much resemblance to the original design as much as I can. And while I'm at it, I will continue to make the rest of the cupboards, which I will install later on. Now, since I'll be working on the roof soon, it's a good time to think about adding these carpets into the upper deck. Well, simply because I won't be able to have access to this location. The roof in this section is a bit curved and warped. So I needed something to shape it much more efficiently, and I decided to go with this air drying clay. But it's not just any other air drying clay, it's paper clay, and it has a very nice texture which resembles concrete or plaster. Once the air clay dries, I will make 2 incisions to the top to make way for the ceiling lights. I'll use paper as a background to scribble on some of the designs here. And the reason I'm using paper here instead of any other material is because I will be installing LED lights here, which will shine down into the room down below. Moving on to the front of the diorama, I have made these tiny little arches, and this is supposed to serve as the remaining crumpled parts of the arch here. And I want to create a broken texture, and the best way to do this is, well, just break it. And once I've thoroughly satisfied my morbid desires to break stuff, I decided to stick back one of the broken pieces, just barely hanging on. I just thought that it made it look more natural and looked a bit more dynamic. With that, I will be able to stick them onto the columns here. And now comes the important part, because this is the front-facing column and they need to look as good as possible. And instead of simply marking or staining it, I'll properly carve the designs onto the wood. Now, this was my first time doing any sort of wood carving here, but eventually I started to get a hang of it little by little, and I was pretty happy with the results. After some paint job, I have cut out these notches here, which will align with the upper deck here. This will hopefully allow me to align everything properly and also support the upper deck. One of the biggest issues I faced with this one was putting the whole thing together and assembling it onto the whole structure. I really don't know why it was so difficult. Maybe I'm doing something wrong here, so if you know a better way that I could have done this, well, please let me know down below as well. Once that's done, I'll do the similar thing to make the lights on the sides. I'll drill a hole and slide in the LED lamps, which I made using the same technique as I did with the first LED. There's also this quirky little floor lamp sticking out here, and although I'll use the same techniques to make the lamp here, I'll have to end up making a cap for it eventually when it comes to installation. Now, it seems like it's going to take a while here to assemble, and I really have nothing else to say here. Although I could have sworn I was about to tell you something. I just can't remember what I was about to say to you. I believe it was something about a rumor or something about Harry Potter. Well, I can't remember it. Anyway, now that most of the LEDs here have been put into place, I will stick the lower base below. This will serve 2 purposes. One is to support the whole structure, and secondly, it will house the battery for all the other lights. Now, I don't really have a multimeter or any of that techie stuff, so it took me a really long time to figure out the positive and negative ends of these lights. Let's see how it all works. All of these lights seem to work, and I'm especially proud of the lights on the ceiling there, which unfortunately we can't really see much of, but hey. With most of the internal structure completed, I can now start working on the exterior surface. Now you might be thinking that there's supposed to be a room on the back there, and why should I cover it up? And the answer is, well, it's a magic world. It's filled with wizards, and they probably do some wormhole parallel universe 𝚜𝚒𝚔𝚔𝚜𝚌 thing, so you never know. Anyway, I glued a lot of foam boards here, put some accents here and there, and I will scratch the whole surface up. The reason I'm scratching this is because I will be using clay. In this case, I'm using dust clay, and one of the biggest challenges working with clay is to have it stick to foam. The idea here is that these scratches will help encourage the clay to creep into these cracks and help adhere to it. And the other part is that presumably these help reduce cracks when the clay dries. Now, while I'm doing this, I also made sure to use a stiff brush and give it some poking here and there. This, I believe, added a layer of depth to the soil texture. I won't be covering the whole structure here as well, and my objective here is more about creating an uneven surface and less to do with imitating reality. Once I'm done with the clay and have it dry out, I will apply a layer of acrylic primer. This is the sort of stuff you put on canvas fabric like the one you saw earlier, but here I'm using it as a base course so that when I paint over the foam, the paint will stick better to it. At least that's what I think. I also made a little bit of clay here on the side and I will crumple it up. The reason I do that is once I have got the finer particles of the clay, I'll sprinkle some of it to the sides of the clay, and this I believe would add a really nice texture to the earthy layer. From then on, it's a matter of airbrushing the whole thing. On the bottom, I start with a slightly rocky color and eventually I'll build it up with a much lighter color. Once I'm satisfied with the bottom layers, I'll start to work on the top moss layer called the humus. So instead of airbrushing, I'll use a paintbrush to apply the texture in a slightly more random or organic manner. For the rocky protrusions here, I will be using a granite gray color, and unlike the other wooden structures, I will give this rock a nice black wash. Now the whole idea I have is to make the whole thing a bit more mossy and damp. And to simulate just that, I will put little blobs of grayish paint and build some layers on this. And this would make it look like the rock has some lichen growing on it. Now the scale of my diorama is rather small, so I had to sieve out some of the mossy textures here because the clumps were just too large for my scale. I'll apply some PVA glue onto the rocks and sprinkle some of the finer moss particles. Dab it with my fingers to encourage some bonding with the rock and then flick and tap to remove the excess material. And eventually I'll get a decent looking mossy rock texture. I'll do the same thing for the other rock surface as well, the only difference being that I'll give it a thicker mossy overgrowth. Next, I will use a black wash and gently tap it onto the mossy surface here. This black wash will hopefully simulate a very damp or wet moss. To build up the rest of the vegetation, I decided to go with some parts filled with dead leaves and the rest being filled with thicker mossy growth. I will use some sawdust for the dry parts, and for the remaining I'll just use the thicker mossy texture. And at this point I thought it was a good idea to paint some of the exposed brick layers on the top surface here, because once this is done I will have to cover all of this up with some viney overgrowth. For my overgrown viney vegetation I decided to use this material. I have no idea what they are called, but essentially it's a mesh of fabric that's been coated with a layer of mossy particles. The good thing about this is that I can simply yank on the fabric and seamlessly create these vines and overgrown creepers hanging across the ground. I'm trying not to cover too much of the surface here, and I want to maintain a certain level of randomness throughout the surface here. And to help with that, I will also add some of these very light colored green vines, and this would imitate a fresher, younger leaf, and I believe the vegetation looks good enough already. Looking at the diorama, I thought the sides of the diorama seemed a bit empty and lifeless, so I also went in and scooped some of these vines there and stuck them using PVA glue on the sides as well. To make the larger pieces of my vegetation, I'll put some hot glue on a sheet of baking powder and stick some of these fabric that looked almost like ferns, and good thing about that is that the size seemed to fit into my scale much better. I'll make about 5 or 6 pieces and glue them across some of the drier, less populated parts of my diorama. Once that's done, it's time to remove the mask. I tried to be really careful about this, but patient I was not, and I ripped off some of the wooden work on the front side. Now that the exterior is completed, I can start focusing on the front of the diorama. I'll use an old plier and simply rip off some of the foam from the stone blocks. I believe that this would create a random texture to the stone blocks and not make it look too flat. I'll give the stone blocks a nice paint job, then give it a nice wash of black color. After that, I'll wedge in these small little pieces of stone blocks that I made earlier to make it feel like they are almost about to fall off. Once that's done, I'll mix in a bit of clay dust with some Mod Podge and make a paste out of it. I'll use this paste to apply them on the front side of the stone blocks, and this would mimic the leftover mortar from stone blocks. I'll also use this paste to make it look like some of the dirt or debris have fallen from the top of the roof. Now, the world of Harry Potter is all about brickworks and British engineering, so I decided to lay in some of these tiny little bricks that I made earlier. I'm assuming that these bricks were crumbled walls from the top and falling down onto the floor. Now once that's done, I'll glue in the remaining carpets, and the reason I'm doing this is because I need to lay some of the textures and paint on the carpet as well. To add this texture, I'll add a line of debris, and for that I will use a bit of sand. I'm using a dry terrain material from Vallejo, and when it dried it looked a bit too glossy and too red, mainly because I used Mod Podge that's glossy, so I went ahead with a brush of brown wash and just dabbed it all over, including the carpets here, to make it look like muddy water had seeped into them. With that, most of the structure is complete, and now I can start focusing on the tiny little things like the pottery. I'll use a metal blob and shape a polymer clay around it, and make sure to apply a bit of cornstarch to prevent it from sticking to the metal. Once I'm complete with the tiny little pots, I will add even tinier little feet, and this was such a pain to stick them onto the pots. If you have a better idea on how to stick them and what I'm doing wrong here, please let me know down below as well. After a very quick bake in the oven, I'll give all of these pots a metallic brown color mixed with some copper color as well. As for the plants and pots in the building, I'll just assume that people have left the building and no one's really there to take care of them, so they are all dead. For the furniture, I'll also be using polymer clay here, and again, I am new to polymer clay sculpting and crafting for that matter, so it took a few attempts to get it right, but eventually it felt very satisfying. Hopefully I'll be able to do some projects that involve polymer clay or sculpting more, but for now, that's that. For the floor lamps in this diorama, I will use this polymer clay, but it's not just any other polymer clay. This is a translucent polymer clay, which is perfect for this lamp because I want some of the light to shine through it as well and give it a nice perfect glow. I'll apply some swatches of gold and green onto the lamp cap to hopefully make it look like the mosaic artwork in Hogwarts Legacy. At this point, I have crafted almost everything, and before I put all of this into the diorama, I'll apply a touch of yellow, red or brown onto the vegetation. This will hopefully break up the flat green tone that we see across the vegetation here. With that done, let's put in every other objects into the Hufflepuff Common Room. Now I deliberately chose to craft the diorama with all these different parts, like the wooden architecture, the terrain, the tiny little bits of furniture including carpets and the indoor lighting. This way I can practice and learn as much as I can through one diorama. I've learned a lot and I see many ways in which I can improve on, like the paintwork for example, the terrain texturing as well, the wooden furnishing, the choice of material and so on. And although I'm very pleased with the final outcome, I don't really take pride in it. As mentioned earlier, this is my first attempt at crafting a diorama, and I'm no better at it than any one of you, and in fact, I've learned everything else from watching YouTube videos from builders that have spent a lifetime exploring these techniques, So I'm merely standing on the shoulders of these giants, and I remain thankful for that, even more so after seeing this finished diorama. So if you are thinking of crafting something, I hope that this video encourages you to start doing it. Look at me, I did it, and so can you. And if you are just watching the video to chill and relax, well, I hope that this video gave you some sort of enjoyment for your day. If you have any suggestions on what you'd want me to craft next, well, let me know in the comments below. With that, thank you for joining me this far. I hope you have a good day, and cheers!